Some films don't just fade, they dissolve into memory, leaving only the echo of a tear. What if the movies that made you cry hardest weren't the blockbusters, but the ones Hollywood quietly buried? From lost reels to banned storylines and broken dreams behind the camera, these forgotten films hold emotions too raw for their time. Let's uncover 15 heartbreaks cinema tried to forget. Number 15. The Spiral Road, 1962. When it premiered, The Spiral Road was marketed as a philosophical adventure, but behind the lush jungles and medical melodrama lay one of the loneliest films of the 1960s. Starring Rock Hudson as an arrogant doctor seeking meaning in a morally decaying world, the story took him from science to faith and ultimately to emotional collapse. Audiences expected heroism. What they got was spiritual despair. The film's portrayal of madness and guilt, especially in the scenes where Hudson's character faces a leper colony, was too grim for audiences raised on happy endings. Critics dismissed it as bleak and confusing, and Universal quietly buried it after a disappointing run. But here's the twist. The Spiral Road was more autobiographical than anyone knew. Hudson, then hiding his private identity under studio control, found the role so draining that he reportedly refused to speak of it afterward. Years later, cinephiles rediscovered it on late-night television, stunned by its existential pain. It wasn't just a story about faith, it was a confession disguised as fiction. Today, it survives as a haunting reflection of moral emptiness and suppressed emotion, a forgotten cry from a time when truth couldn't yet be spoken. Number 14. Wild River, 1960. Elia Kazan's. Wild River was a masterpiece swallowed by politics. The story followed a young TVA agent played by Montgomery Clift who must evict an elderly woman refusing to abandon her land to a new dam project. What begins as government duty turns into an aching portrait of love, loss, and moral guilt. Critics adored its humanity, but the public didn't. Why? The film's political undertone, about displacement, federal overreach, and the cost of progress, hit too close to home in Cold War America. Studios wanted patriotic triumphs, not moral ambiguity. Behind the scenes, Kazan fought censorship boards who wanted to cut scenes depicting poverty and defiance. Clift, already battling inner demons and post-accident trauma, delivered a performance so emotionally naked that co-star Lee Remick said he never came back from it. The result was one of the most heartbreaking endings of its decade, a slow fade between what's right and what's lost forever. For years, Wild River was nearly impossible to find, but modern critics now call it Kazan's most human work, a story that dares to cry for both sides of a broken dream. Number 13. The Pawnbroker, 1964. Before Schindler's List ever existed, there was The Pawnbroker. Rod Steiger's portrayal of a Holocaust survivor numbed by trauma was one of the boldest performances in American film, and one of the first to break television's moral code. The story is simple but devastating. A man running a pawn shop in Harlem, haunted by memories of the camps, unable to connect with anyone. Yet it was the how that shocked everyone. Flashbacks that blurred reality. Grief shown through silence instead of words. The film nearly got banned. The Production Code Authority objected not only to its raw emotion, but to a brief, daring moment of nudity used to convey vulnerability, not titillation. Censors tried to block its release, calling it too despairing for audiences. Steiger reportedly stayed in character for months, and the weight of the role broke him emotionally. Critics wept in theaters, calling it the most honest cry of post-war cinema, but after its initial wave, it vanished from popular circulation, replaced by lighter fare. Only in recent decades has The Pawnbroker been hailed as a lost masterpiece, one that turned personal pain into art and silence into a scream that still echoes through film history. Number 12. A Patch of Blue, 1965. When A Patch of Blue debuted, it was quietly revolutionary and heartbreakingly human. Sidney Poitier starred as a gentleman who befriends a blind white girl, played by Elizabeth Hartman, who has never experienced kindness. What begins as a story of friendship slowly transforms into a meditation on innocence, prejudice, and the invisible boundaries that divide love. The film was a hit among critics but faced subtle suppression in certain southern U.S. states. Why? Its tender interracial connection, filmed in scenes so intimate and humane, enraged segregationists. Theater owners refused to screen it. Censors tried to trim moments where the characters simply touched hands. MGM stood firm, but distribution in the Deep South was quietly halted. Behind the scenes, Hartman, only 22, poured her fragile soul into the role. She later confessed that she never emotionally recovered from playing someone whose entire life was darkness and fear. Her performance was nominated for an Oscar, yet she faded into obscurity soon after, her career shadowed by depression. Today, A Patch of Blue feels almost prophetic, a film about seeing with the heart, not the eyes. It dares you to feel empathy even when the world insists you shouldn't. In its quiet way, it remains one of the purest cries for human decency ever filmed. Number 11. The Innocents, 1961. Though remembered by horror enthusiasts, The Innocents is more tragedy than terror. Directed by Jack Clayton and based on Henry James' The Turn of the Screw, it stars Deborah Kerr as a governess who believes the children under her care are possessed by spirits. But what makes the film devastating isn't its ghosts. It's the slow erosion of sanity and faith. Critics hailed its artistry, luminous cinematography, haunting silence, but audiences left confused and shaken. Fox executives panicked when early screenings ended in stunned quiet rather than applause. Some reviewers accused the film of moral ambiguity and psychological cruelty. Whispers spread that the production itself was cursed. Kerr's emotional exhaustion was so intense that crew members claimed she cried between takes. The child actors were shielded from the script's darker meanings, while Clayton fought with censors who wanted a clear ending. He refused, and paid for it with the film's commercial failure. Years later, scholars re-examined The Innocents as one of the most emotionally devastating psychological dramas ever made, a film about repression, grief, and the blurred line between protection and possession. It's not a ghost story. It's a story about being haunted by yourself. Number 10. The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, 1962. Before Rebellion had a soundtrack, this British classic gave it a heartbeat. The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, directed by Tony Richardson, was the cry of an angry young man, part prison drama, part social protest, all heartbreak. Tom Courtenay plays Colin, a working-class teenager sent to reform school whose gift for running earns him the attention of authority figures who see him as a chance to prove their system works. But as he sprints through fog and isolation, he faces a cruel choice: win the race and conform, or lose everything to keep his pride. The film hit like a storm in 1962, raw, poetic, and too politically honest. It was condemned by conservative newspapers as anti-British. State-funded film boards almost withdrew support after its defiant ending. Even actor Michael Redgrave reportedly clashed with Richardson over the bleak tone. But here's the twist. Audiences didn't know how personal it was. Richardson himself had grown up poor, watching friends crushed by class and conformity. His film wasn't just social realism, it was autobiography with scars. Today, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner feels eerily modern, a young man running from a system built to break him. It's not a film you watch, it's one that follows you, breathing down your neck long after the credits fade. Number 9. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, 1968. When The Heart is a Lonely Hunter was released, it quietly tore through audiences' emotions, a film so gentle, so tragic, that many theaters couldn't keep tissues in stock. Starring Alan Arkin as John Singer, a deaf-mute man who befriends a lonely Southern girl, Sandra Locke, the film explores the unbearable solitude of people who simply cannot be understood. The movie received glowing reviews but was swiftly forgotten amid the louder chaos of late 1960s cinema. The Vietnam. Headlines: The rise of counterculture and the end of Hollywood's golden age. Studios didn't know how to market quiet pain. MGM buried it beneath war dramas and youth rebellion pictures. Behind the scenes, the experience was as heartbreaking as the story itself. Sandra Locke, in her first major role, reportedly spent nights crying after emotional scenes, describing the set as a room where sadness hung in the air. Alan Arkin, meanwhile, used near-total silence on set to remain in character, isolating himself from cast and crew to better embody Singer's wordless despair. Censors worried the film's interracial themes and portrayal of Southern poverty would upset small-town audiences, leading to limited distribution. But decades later, it was rediscovered as one of cinema's most human portrayals of isolation, a story about connection, silence, and the pain of simply being different. Watching it now feels like eavesdropping on forgotten souls. Every line whispers one truth. Sometimes the loudest cry is the one you never hear. Number 8. Lilies of the Field, 1963. Before The Sound of Music and To Sir with Love, there was Lilies of the Field, a film of hope, faith, and tears that Hollywood didn't see coming. Sidney Poitier stars as Homer Smith, a wandering handyman who stops to fix a roof for a group of German nuns and ends up building them a church. Audiences adored its warmth, yet even at the height of Poitier's fame, studios were hesitant. Why? Because it portrayed faith without cynicism and race without bitterness. Something too subtle for a world accustomed to loud conflict. Some Southern distributors refused to screen it, calling its message too progressive. Behind the camera, the production was nearly as miraculous as the story. Shot on a shoestring budget in Arizona, the crew often couldn't afford retakes. Poitier worked without a trailer and insisted on performing the film's soulful finale in one uninterrupted take, a moment so pure it won him an Academy Award, the first for an African-American man in a leading role. And yet, after its brief moment of glory, Lilies of the Field faded from pop culture memory, replaced by louder, flashier, faith-based stories. Today, it feels like a time capsule of quiet kindness and persistence. It's the kind of film that doesn't ask for your tears, it earns them. Number 7. The Miracle Worker, 1962. In a decade obsessed with spectacle, The Miracle Worker broke hearts with two people in one room. Based on Helen Keller's true story, the film paired Patty Duke as Keller and Anne Bancroft as her relentless teacher, Annie Sullivan. What followed wasn't sentiment, it was emotional warfare that left audiences shaken. The performances were so raw they bordered on dangerous. Duke and Bancroft physically fought in real takes, leaving bruises and broken furniture on set. Director Arthur Penn refused to tone it down. He wanted the violence of communication, the fury of love. Censors complained it was too violent for an inspirational story. Audiences cried openly in theaters, not for tragedy but triumph. Yet behind the applause, the actresses carried the psychological toll for years. Duke later revealed that the intensity blurred her own emotional boundaries. Bancroft confessed she'd never performed anything that cost her so much. Despite critical acclaim and 2 Oscars, The Miracle Worker soon vanished from public memory, overshadowed by musicals and epics. But its emotional gravity never faded. It's not just a story about overcoming disability. It's about the brutal, beautiful process of learning to understand another human being. It remains one of cinema's greatest reminders that love, at its core, is war. And every victory comes with scars. Number 6. A Man Called Peter, 1955. Before Hollywood glorified rebellion, it once worshipped quiet faith, and A Man Called Peter was its hymn. Based on the true story of Peter Marshall, a Scottish immigrant who became chaplain of the U.S. Senate, this Technicolor drama wasn't a blockbuster. It was a sermon set to film, one that made entire audiences cry without ever raising its voice. When released, it was beloved by churchgoers and dismissed by critics who found it too pious. But what the critics missed was its core, a deeply human story about conviction in a cynical world. Richard Todd, who played Marshall, reportedly spent weeks studying the minister's original sermons and the emotional weight shows. His performance, especially in the climactic hospital scenes, moved audiences to silence. Censorship boards in certain regions worried it blurred the line between religion and politics, especially since it featured scenes inside the U.S. Senate an unprecedented move at the time. Fox Studios trimmed nearly 10 minutes of dialogue they feared would alienate secular audiences. Ironically, those scenes were later restored when the film became a favorite of spiritual film festivals in the 1970s. Forgotten today, A Man Called Peter stands as a story of love, loss, and leadership, a movie that asks how much of yourself you're willing to give to faith and to people. Watch it now, and you'll realize sincerity, once mocked, might be cinema's rarest miracle. Number 5. I Never Sang for My Father, 1970. Few films have captured the heartbreak of family as honestly as I Never Sang for My Father. Gene Hackman and Melvyn Douglas play a son and father locked in emotional stalemate, two men desperate to love each other, yet incapable of saying so. The movie was a critical triumph, but a box office ghost. Columbia Pictures released it quietly, fearing its melancholy tone would repel audiences seeking escapism during the Vietnam years. Critics praised its honesty. Too honest, some said. There were no explosions, no redemption arcs, only the devastating truth that sometimes love arrives too late. Behind the scenes, Hackman reportedly broke down during the climactic confrontation, a scene he later called the hardest 5 minutes I ever filmed. Douglas, whose own health was fading, brought an authenticity that made every line ache. The film faced pushback from conservative broadcasters for its portrayal of death and emotional dysfunction, with TV airings delayed for years. When it finally reached home audiences, viewers found something painfully familiar: the silence between fathers and sons. Its legacy lives quietly in the DNA of modern dramas like Kramer vs. Kramer. But I Never Sang for My Father remains raw, less about winning love than learning to live with its absence. It's the kind of movie that doesn't end when the credits roll. It lingers, whispering what we never say. Number 4. They Might Be Giants, 1971. Imagine Don Quixote reborn in modern Manhattan. And you have They Might Be Giants. George C. Scott plays a man who believes he's Sherlock Holmes and Joanne Woodward his reluctant Watson. Together, they wander New York chasing imaginary villains, only to reveal in the end that the real enemy is loneliness. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. The film was released quietly and soon vanished, overshadowed by Hollywood's new wave of gritty realism. Yet critics who did see it were stunned. The New York Times called it a fantasy of unbearable sadness. Rumors swirled that Universal cut 30 minutes of footage, fearing its tone, part comedy, part tragedy, was too unmarketable. Director Anthony Harvey protested, but the studio prevailed, leaving a fractured masterpiece that confused audiences but broke the hearts of those who understood it. Behind the camera, Scott, known for playing soldiers and tyrants, delivered one of his gentlest performances. His chemistry with Woodward was luminous, their final scene a quiet apocalypse of emotion. Forgotten by time, They Might Be Giants remains a film for dreamers who see the world not as it is, but as it should be. Its title, borrowed from Cervantes, feels like a farewell to innocence itself. A story about madness that reminds us how sane love can be. Number 3. The Last Picture Show, 1971. Though now revered by critics, The Last Picture Show was almost lost to time, dismissed as too bleak, too slow, too painful to endure. Peter Bogdanovich's black-and-white elegy for small-town America followed young adults trapped in emotional dead ends, their dreams evaporating like dust across the Texas plains. At its core, the film isn't about romance or rebellion, it's about the death of innocence itself. Timothy Bottoms, Sybil Shepherd, and Jeff Bridges were barely out of adolescence when they filmed it, yet their performances carry the weight of a generation that had already grown old. Every silence, every awkward glance is a funeral for the American dream. Controversy surrounded the release. Censors balked at its frank depiction of longing and moral decay. Some theaters banned it altogether. Bogdanovich fought vicious studio battles, refusing to sanitize the pain. "If we clean it," he said, "we lie about the world." The film premiered quietly, then spread through word of mouth, a whisper that became a legend. Decades later, its beauty still cuts like glass. The final shot, a lonely woman in a cold kitchen reaching for the past, remains one of cinema's purest heartbreaks. The Last Picture Show isn't just about endings, it is an ending for youth, for love, for the towns that time forgets. Number 2. Days of Wine and Roses, 1962. Before addiction dramas became Oscar bait, Days of Wine and Roses showed what it really costs to lose yourself, and the one you love, to despair. Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick play a couple who fall madly in love, then slowly destroy each other through alcoholism. When it premiered, audiences weren't ready. Lemmon, famous for comedy, terrified fans with his raw portrayal of collapse. Critics called it too real, and some theaters refused to show it to avoid depressing ticket buyers. The studio faced pressure to alter the ending, a plea for redemption that never comes. Director Blake Edwards refused. Behind the scenes, filming those breakdowns wasn't acting. Lemmon later confessed he saw his own struggles reflected in the role, while Remick said it haunted her for years. The emotional weight of their performances reshaped American cinema's understanding of tragedy, but their pain was so convincing that many avoided repeat viewings. The film won Oscars, then disappeared from broadcast schedules for decades. Only in the age of retrospectives did audiences rediscover it, realizing it wasn't about addiction at all, but about love's inability to save the broken. Every frame hurts. Every scene bleeds truth. Watching it feels like staring into a mirror that refuses to look away. Number 1. Johnny Got His Gun, 1971. And finally, the film too powerful for its own time. Dalton Trumbo's Johnny Got His Gun was banned, censored, and buried, all because it forced audiences to feel the unthinkable. The story follows a young soldier, Joe Bonham, who wakes in a hospital after a World War I explosion, alive, but without arms, legs, or a face. Trapped inside his mind, he can only think, remember, and wish for death. It's not horror in the traditional sense, it's existential tragedy. Censors and governments hated it. The U.S. military condemned the film for being anti-war propaganda, and several countries banned it outright. Critics couldn't decide if it was art or agony. Trumbo, a blacklisted writer returning from exile, refused to soften his vision. He financed the film himself, directing it in a fever of conviction. Behind the scenes, actor Timothy Bottoms endured weeks of isolation filming inside a dark soundstage, acting only with breathing and whispers. Crew members reportedly left set in tears. The film vanished after a limited release, then resurfaced in the 1980s, spliced into Metallica's One music video, shocking a new generation. Today, Johnny Got His Gun stands as one of cinema's ultimate cries for empathy, a plea for humanity in a world addicted to destruction. It's not entertainment, it's revelation, and it leaves you changed forever. These films may have vanished from the marquee, but their emotions never died. Grief, hope, love, loss, the universal truth cinema was built on. Each one asks the same silent question: how much can a heart endure before it breaks? Which of these forgotten masterpieces will haunt you the most? Like, subscribe, and tell us which one made you cry.